More than 3,000 years ago, in what is now northern Iraq, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected inside an ancient grave. A man and a woman had been buried side by side. Their bodies were carefully positioned. Their remains suggested they had not simply been placed there at random. Someone had taken time to arrange them together, as if their connection mattered even after death. At first glance, it seemed romantic. But then scientists asked a difficult question. Was this actually love? Or were we projecting modern emotions onto people who lived in a completely different world? The mystery became even deeper when researchers began looking further back in time. Much further. Because if humans today write songs about love, build monuments for love, start wars over love, and spend entire lives searching for love, when did it all begin? At what point in human history did two ancient humans first look at each other and feel something more than survival? The answer might seem obvious. Surely love appeared when humans became human. But there was a problem. The evidence didn't fit. For most of human history, survival was brutally difficult. Every day was a battle against hunger, against predators, against disease, against freezing temperatures, against rival groups. A single mistake could mean death. In that kind of world, emotions that did not help survival should have disappeared quickly. Natural selection is ruthless. Anything that wastes energy tends to vanish. And yet love survived. Not only survived, it became one of the most powerful forces in human existence. And that's where things get strange. When scientists began studying our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas, they discovered hints of something unexpected. Chimpanzees form friendships. Bonobos develop long-term social bonds. Gorillas can remain attached to specific partners for years. These animals do not write poetry. They do not exchange gifts on anniversaries. But they clearly experience social attachments that go beyond simple reproduction. This raised a new mystery. If our ape relatives already possessed the building blocks of emotional attachment, then perhaps love was far older than humanity itself. Perhaps the roots of romance stretched millions of years into the past. Researchers turned their attention to some of the earliest known human ancestors. Creatures like Australopithecus, small-bodied hominins who walked across African landscapes more than 3 million years ago. Their world was dangerous. Lions hunted the grasslands. Leopards waited in trees. Massive crocodiles patrolled rivers. Food was never guaranteed. Every day demanded constant vigilance. The obvious assumption was that relationships would have been short and practical. Finamade, produce offspring, move on, simple, efficient. But then scientists noticed something that challenged this idea. Ancient human children were unusually helpless, far more helpless than the babies of most other mammals. A newborn foal can stand within hours. A young chimpanzee becomes relatively independent, much faster than a human child. But human offspring required years of protection, years of feeding, years of teaching, years of care. And that created an enormous survival problem. How could a mother gather food, avoid predators, and protect a vulnerable child for so long completely on her own? The answer seemed obvious. She couldn't. But if one parent wasn't enough, who helped? And could that need for cooperation have accidentally created something that would eventually become one of the most powerful emotions in human history? For decades, anthropologists searched for clues. The challenge was obvious. Love does not fossilize. You cannot dig up a heart-shaped stone and prove two ancient humans were romantically attached. You cannot measure affection from a skeleton. At least, that was the assumption. Then researchers began noticing patterns hidden within ancient bones. Patterns that suggested something surprising. Some prehistoric individuals survived injuries that should have killed them. Broken legs, crushed ribs, severe disabilities, diseases that lasted for years. One famous example came from a much later human relative known as Neanderthal. Several skeletons showed evidence of catastrophic injuries. Some individuals had lost the use of limbs. Others suffered major trauma that would have prevented hunting. Yet they survived for years afterward. That meant somebody had fed them, protected them, stayed with them. The fact was remarkable. The consequence was even more important. In a world where every calorie mattered, caring for another person carried a cost. Food given to an injured individual could not be eaten by the caregiver. Time spent helping someone weakened your own chances of survival. Yet ancient humans repeatedly made that sacrifice. Why? The answer seems simple. Family. Relatives often help one another because they share genes. Helping a brother, sister, or child can indirectly help your own genetic future. For a while, many scientists believed this explained everything, but then the evidence didn't fit. Some archaeological sites suggested care extended beyond immediate family. Individuals appeared to receive long-term support from entire groups. And that created a new mystery. Why would unrelated people invest precious resources in someone who could no longer contribute? The answer may lie in one of the most important developments in human evolution. Humans did not become successful because we were the strongest. We were not the fastest. We did not have claws. We did not have fangs. What we had was cooperation. And cooperation works best when individuals form strong emotional bonds. Trust increases survival. Loyalty increases survival. Attachment increases survival. Gradually, researchers began to suspect that what we call love may have evolved from a much older survival system, not a poetic feeling, not romance, a biological strategy. Imagine a pair of early humans living on the African savanna 2 million years ago. The dry season arrives. Food becomes scarce. Predators become bolder. A mother carries an infant who cannot walk. Alone, her chances are poor. But if a male remains nearby, bringing food, warning of danger, and helping defend the child, the infant's odds improve dramatically. The child survives. The parents pass on their genes. Over thousands of generations, natural selection would favor individuals who stayed together longer. Not because love was beautiful, because love worked. And that's where scientists discovered something unexpected. Modern neuroscience reveals that romantic attachment activates ancient chemical systems deep within the brain. Oxytocin, dopamine, vasopressin. These chemicals create feelings of trust, reward, and emotional connection. What's fascinating is that versions of these systems are found throughout the animal kingdom. The machinery itself is ancient, far older than modern humans, far older than civilization, perhaps even older than the genus Homo. But there was a problem. If pair bonding helped raise children, why do humans experience such intense emotions? Why jealousy? Why heartbreak? Why longing? Why the overwhelming feeling that one specific person matters more than everyone else? These emotions seem far stronger than simple cooperation. The answer seemed obvious. They evolved to keep couples together. But once again, the evidence didn't fully fit. Because ancient humans weren't just surviving as pairs, they were surviving as tribes. And what scientists discovered next would completely change the story of when humans first fell in love. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Not from a skeleton, not from a cave painting, not from a burial site. It came from the study of human loneliness. Researchers noticed something strange about the human brain. When people are socially isolated for long periods, the brain reacts almost as if it is experiencing physical danger. Stress hormone is rise. Sleep becomes disrupted. Immune systems weaken. Decision-making deteriorates. Even life expectancy decreases. In other words, being alone can be deadly. Today, that might seem surprising. After all, modern humans can survive physically without constant companionship. We can order food, drive cars, live by ourselves. But for most of human history, isolation was a death sentence. A lone human on the prehistoric savanna was vulnerable to predators, starvation, injury, and rival groups. The fact was simple. Humans survived through connection. The consequence was enormous. Natural selection began rewarding brains that strongly valued social bonds. Not weakly, strongly. Strong enough to keep people together even when cooperation became difficult. Strong enough to make separation painful. Strong enough to make attachment feel essential. And that's where things get strange. The very emotions people associate with romance today may have originally evolved for a completely different purpose. Not to create love stories. To prevent abandonment. Think about it. If early humans easily walked away from partners, children would suffer. If parents abandoned offspring, survival rates would collapse. If group members constantly left one another, cooperation would fail. The tribe would weaken. So evolution may have built powerful emotional mechanisms designed to hold people together. What feels romantic today may have begun as a survival technology, an invisible tool created by natural selection. But then scientists discovered something even more surprising. Love wasn't only helping parents raise children. It may have helped create human intelligence itself. Around 2 million years ago, human ancestors began undergoing dramatic changes. Brains grew larger, tool use became more sophisticated, social structures became increasingly complex. But bigger brains created a major problem. Human babies had to be born earlier because their heads became too large to safely pass through the birth canal. As a result, infants became even more helpless. They required even more years of protection, even more food, even more teaching, even more cooperation. The fact created a dangerous cycle. Larger brains improved survival, but larger brains also produced helpless children. The consequence was clear. Parents had to remain connected longer than ever before, and that may have intensified emotional attachment across generations. The answer seemed obvious. Love evolved because helpless babies needed caregivers. It was a compelling explanation. Then archaeologists uncovered evidence that complicated everything. At several prehistoric sites, researchers found objects that appeared to have little survival value. Pigmo, decorated shells. Beads, carefully selected stones. These items were carried across long distances despite adding weight and offering no obvious protection from predators. Why would ancient humans waste energy transporting such things? The answer seemed mysterious. Until scientists considered another possibility. Maybe these objects weren't tools. Maybe they were signals. Signals of identity. Signals of status. Signals of belonging. And perhaps even signals of attraction. Suddenly, the story began to change. Ancient humans may not have simply formed partnerships because survival demanded it. They may have begun choosing partners, displaying qualities, communicating preferences, showing creativity, demonstrating commitment. In other words, something resembling courtship may have appeared far earlier than anyone expected. And if that was true, then the origin of love was no longer just about survival. It was becoming something much more complex. Something uniquely human. But one final discovery would push the story even further. Because researchers eventually found evidence suggesting that ancient humans weren't merely forming bonds, they were remembering them. And that changed everything. The clue came from the dead. For most animals, death ends a relationship immediately. A herd moves on. A pack continues hunting. Life goes forward. But humans are different. And evidence suggests we may have been different for a very long time. Across multiple prehistoric sites, archaeologists uncovered something deeply unusual. Bodies that had been carefully buried. Not discarded. Not abandoned. Buried. Sometimes with tools. Sometimes with pigments. Sometimes with objects that appear to have held symbolic meaning. The fact itself was remarkable. Digging a grave requires time and energy. In prehistoric environments, both were precious. The consequence was unavoidable. The dead still mattered to the living. And that's where scientists began asking a fascinating question. What exactly were people grieving? Was it merely the loss of a useful group member? A hunter? A gatherer? A protector? Or was something deeper happening? Because grief reveals something important. You cannot miss someone unless they mattered before they were gone. And the stronger the bond, the stronger the grief. Suddenly, researchers realized they might be looking at indirect evidence of emotional attachment stretching far back into prehistory. Not proof of modern romance, but proof that relationships carried emotional weight. The answer seemed closer than ever. Then came the major twist. For generations, people imagined love as a recent cultural invention, a product of poetry, songs, civilization, agriculture, kings and queens, ancient myths. But the evidence was pointing somewhere entirely different. Love was not created by civilization. Civilization may have been built on top of love. That changed everything. Because if strong emotional bonds existed before farming, before cities, before writing, before organized religion, then love was not a luxury. It was part of the foundation that made human civilization possible. Think about the implications. Long-term partnerships helped raise children. Children survived long enough to learn complex skills. Knowledge accumulated across generations. Families became larger networks. Networks became communities. Communities became tribes. Tribes exchanged ideas. Ideas became culture. Culture eventually became civilization. The chain stretched backward through thousands upon thousands of years. And hidden near the beginning of that chain was emotional attachment. Not as a side effect, as a survival advantage. But there was one final mystery. When did ancient humans first truly fall in love? Scientists cannot point to a single skeleton, a single cave, a single moment frozen in time. No fossil carries a label that says, this was the first romantic relationship. The exact moment is lost forever. Yet the evidence allows us to make a remarkable conclusion. The roots of romantic love likely reach back hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of years. Long before modern humans existed, long before history began, long before anyone could record their feelings. The earliest humans may never have written poems. They never exchanged wedding rings. They never sent love letters. But deep inside their brains, many of the same biological systems that shape human love today were already at work. A glance, a bond, a desire to stay close, a fear of loss, a willingness to sacrifice. The building blocks were already there. And over countless generations, those ancient survival mechanisms gradually evolved into the emotion we now call love. Which leads to a surprising conclusion. When you fall in love today, you are experiencing something that is both deeply personal and unimaginably ancient. The racing heart, the attachment, the longing, the joy, the pain. None of it appeared suddenly in the modern world. Those feelings may carry echoes of millions of years of human survival. They may be remnants of countless ancestors who stayed together during droughts, defended children from predators, shared food during famine, and refused to abandon one another when survival became difficult. In a strange way, every love story today may contain traces of the prehistoric world. A world where romance was not about flowers, songs, or grand gestures. It was about survival. And perhaps that is the forgotten origin of romance. Not a luxury, not an invention, but one of the oldest survival strategies our species ever developed. And without it, humanity might never have survived long enough to tell its story.